Sound landscapes. The gentle patter of rain against a window soothes your racing thoughts. A distant train whistle evokes unexpected nostalgia. The chaotic clatter of a busy restaurant makes conversation feel like a battle. These experiences reflect a profound truth. Our sonic environments shape our psychological states with remarkable power, often operating below the threshold of conscious awareness while profoundly influencing our well-being, cognitive function, and emotional equilibrium. Sound reaches us in ways that other environmental elements cannot, penetrating closed doors, flowing around corners, and arriving even when our eyes are closed. Unlike visual stimuli that require our attention be directed toward them, sound envelops us completely, creating an omnipresent environmental influence that affects us whether we're actively listening or not. This pervasive quality makes sound both a potential source of continuous nourishment or persistent depletion for your psychological well-being. In this chapter, we'll explore the complex relationship between sound and psychological experience, examining how different acoustic environments influence your nervous system, discovering which sound qualities support various psychological needs, learning practical approaches for creating acoustic comfort, and understanding strategies for managing sound privacy in various contexts. Through this exploration, you'll gain deeper insight into creating sound environments that actively support, rather than unconsciously undermine your psychological health. The psychological impact of sound environments. Sound influences your psychological state through multiple parallel pathways, creating effects that range from the immediately observable to the subtly cumulative. Understanding these pathways allows more conscious creation of sound environments aligned with specific psychological needs and intentions. Neurophysiological pathways. Sound begins its psychological journey through direct physiological pathways long before conscious interpretation occurs. When sound waves reach your ears, they trigger complex neurological cascades that influence arousal levels, stress responses, and even hormonal systems through connections between auditory processing regions and your autonomic nervous system. Research using functional brain imaging confirms these connections, showing that different sound environments activate distinct neural networks associated with either stress or relaxation. Studies suggest that harsh, unpredictable, or chaotic sound environments may increase activity in the amygdala, a brain region associated with threat detection and stress response, while rhythmic, predictable, nature-based sounds often activate parasympathetic nervous system regions associated with relaxation and recovery. These direct neurological effects create what could be called autonomic sound signatures, patterns of nervous system activation that occur before you've consciously evaluated or even identified a sound. These signatures help explain why certain sounds feel immediately soothing or jarring, regardless of personal preferences or past experiences, reflecting evolutionary adaptations to sounds that historically signaled either safety or potential danger. The physiological impact of sound appears particularly pronounced because your auditory system remains fully active even during sleep, continuing to monitor your environment and influencing physiological state without conscious awareness. Research has demonstrated that environmental sounds can significantly alter sleep architecture, changing how much time you spend in different sleep stages without causing conscious awakening, explaining why sound quality at night influences how refreshed you feel in the morning, despite no conscious memory of hearing anything. Cognitive processing effects. Beyond physiological arousal, sound environments significantly influence cognitive function through what could be described as processing load effects, the amount of mental resources required to manage, filter, or interpret ongoing auditory information while simultaneously performing other mental tasks. Research consistently demonstrates that unpredictable or information-rich sound environments, especially those containing intelligible speech, can significantly impair performance on tasks requiring working memory, reading comprehension, or mathematical processing. This impairment appears to occur through what cognitive scientists understand as phonological interference, competition for limited verbal processing resources in the brain. Studies in workplace environments suggest that intelligible background speech may reduce performance on knowledge work tasks compared to quieter environments, with particularly pronounced effects on tasks involving verbal information processing. This reduction represents hidden cognitive costs that accumulate throughout workdays in poor acoustic environments, creating unnecessary mental fatigue. Conversely, certain structured sound environments may enhance specific cognitive functions. Research suggests that rhythmic, nonverbal background sound at moderate tempos may support sustained attention through neural entrainment, the tendency for brain activity to synchronize with external rhythmic stimuli. This synchronization may create more stable attentional states that resist distraction during extended mental tasks. Perhaps most interestingly, moderate ambient sound, similar to a busy cafe, has been shown in some studies to enhance creative thinking compared to either very quiet or very loud environments. This effect appears to occur through what creativity researchers describe as optimal processing disfluency, slight increases in processing difficulty that promote more abstract thinking and broader conceptual connections. Emotional regulation and mood sound profoundly influences emotional state through both direct neurological pathways and complex psychological associations, making acoustic environments powerful tools for emotional regulation and mood management. Research demonstrates that sound affects emotional state through multiple complementary pathways. Direct activation involves sound qualities that trigger specific emotional responses through innate neurological connections. Studies show that harsh, abrupt sounds with rapid rise times, how quickly a sound reaches its maximum amplitude, activate threat detection systems regardless of cultural background or personal history. Conversely, sounds with gradual amplitude changes, harmonic tonal qualities, and predictable patterns typically activate calming responses across diverse populations, suggesting universal aspects of emotional sound processing. Associative pathways involve connections between specific sounds and emotional memories or learned meanings. These associations create highly individualized emotional responses based on personal history, explaining why certain sounds, perhaps a particular song, a train whistle, or waves on a beach, might trigger powerful emotional responses for one person, while creating minimal reaction in another. Entrainment effects occur when sound rhythms influence physiological rhythms through external pacemaking, the tendency for internal biological rhythms to synchronize with consistent external cues. Research suggests that rhythmic sound patterns between 60 to 80 beats per minute may facilitate relaxation by slowing respiration and heart rate through subtle synchronization effects, while faster rhythms can increase physiological arousal and energy. These combined pathways make sound a particularly powerful tool for emotional regulation, allowing external state management, using environmental elements to facilitate desired emotional states when internal regulation proves challenging. Sound's effectiveness for this purpose explains its nearly universal use across cultures for emotional regulation in contexts ranging from religious ceremonies to modern stress management practices. Social and communication dimensions. Sound environments dramatically influence social interaction and communication quality through multiple mechanisms that shape both the practical and psychological aspects of human connection. Research identifies several key dimensions through which sound influences social experience. Speech intelligibility, how easily we can understand others' words, forms the foundation of verbal communication quality. Studies in acoustic engineering demonstrate that even modest background noise increases cognitive load during listening, the mental effort required to accurately perceive speech. As this load increases, fewer cognitive resources remain available for processing meaning, formulating thoughtful responses, or attending to emotional nuances, diminishing conversation quality even when basic understanding remains possible. Psychological security, feeling safe enough to express thoughts and feelings authentically, depends significantly on acoustic privacy. Research in workplace psychology shows that employees in poor acoustic environments often report withholding information, limiting personal disclosure, and experiencing anxiety about being overheard. These responses reflect communication inhibition that significantly impacts relationship development and maintenance, particularly for interactions involving sensitive content. Emotional attunement, the ability to perceive and respond to others' emotional states, suffers in problematic acoustic environments. Studies demonstrate that background noise significantly reduces accuracy in emotional tone recognition, with particularly strong effects on subtle emotional cues that often carry crucial interpersonal information. This reduction creates emotional connection interference that diminishes interaction quality even when factual information transfers successfully. These social dimensions help explain why acoustic quality proves particularly critical in relationship-centered environments like homes, educational settings, and healthcare facilities. In these contexts, sound doesn't just affect individual comfort, but fundamentally shapes human connection quality through its influence on the mechanisms through which relationships develop and deepen. Beneficial sounds for psychological well-being. Beyond understanding sound's general psychological impacts, Research has identified specific sound categories that consistently demonstrate positive effects on psychological well-being through both immediate and cumulative influences on mental state, cognitive function, and emotional regulation. Natural soundscapes. Among all sound categories, natural soundscapes, acoustic environments featuring elements like flowing water, gentle wind, bird songs, and rustling leaves, consistently demonstrate the strongest and most universal psychological benefits across diverse research contexts and populations. Natural soundscapes appear to provide neurologically optimized acoustic information, sound patterns that our auditory systems evolved to process over thousands of generations. These sound environments activate parasympathetic relaxation responses, reduce cognitive strain, and enhance attentional restoration through their inherent structures and information characteristics. Research identifies several qualities that make natural soundscapes particularly beneficial. Information richness without overload characterizes many natural sound environments. Studies analyzing the acoustic properties of nature, sounds reveal layered complexity with pattern consistency. Sound environments containing multiple sound sources that nonetheless maintain recognizable patterns and predictable variation. This balance provides sufficient perceptual stimulation to maintain interest, while avoiding the chaotic unpredictability that triggers vigilance or stress responses. Evolutionary familiarity appears central to natural sounds' psychological benefits. Research suggests that sounds present throughout human evolutionary history, particularly water sounds, certain bird calls, and wind moving through vegetation, activate what could be described as safety templates in the nervous system. These templates essentially signal all clear to vigilance mechanisms, allowing attentional systems to relax monitoring efforts that would otherwise consume cognitive resources. Informational masking occurs when natural sounds cover potentially distracting sounds without themselves demanding attention. Studies demonstrate that flowing water sounds effectively mask speech and mechanical noises through perceptually similar frequency distribution, covering similar frequency ranges as the sounds being masked while providing more psychologically acceptable content. This masking reduces cognitive processing demands without creating the sense of acoustic deprivation that complete silence might produce. The psychological benefits of natural soundscapes appear remarkably consistent across research contexts. Studies in healthcare environments show that nature sounds can reduce patient anxiety compared to standard hospital sounds. Workplace research demonstrates improved concentration, reduced reported stress, and enhanced performance on attention-demanding tasks in environments with natural sound elements compared to typical office acoustics. Educational research suggests that subtle natural sound incorporation may support sustained attention and reduce student stress during learning activities. Natural soundscapes demonstrate particularly powerful effects through what appears to be multisensory congruence, alignment between what we hear and what evolutionary experience suggests we should see in such environments. Research indicates that combining visual nature elements with congruent natural sounds creates stronger psychological benefits than either component alone, suggesting that multisensory environmental approaches provide more robust well-being support than single-sense interventions. Rhythmic and harmonic sound patterns. Beyond natural sound environments, certain structured acoustic patterns, particularly those featuring consistent rhythms and harmonic tonal qualities, demonstrate significant psychological benefits through both neurological entrainment and emotional regulation pathways. Research identifies several beneficial rhythmic and harmonic sound categories. Consistent mid-tempo rhythms between approximately 60 to 80 beats per minute, similar to average resting heart rates, demonstrate calming effects through what appears to be a form of physiological entrainment. Studies measuring both subjective experiences and physiological markers show that these rhythms tend to reduce heart rate, blood pressure, and stress hormone levels compared to either faster or more irregular rhythmic patterns. This range roughly corresponds to tempos commonly used in meditation music across diverse cultural traditions. Harmonic sound combinations featuring specific frequency relationships create what acousticians call consonants, tonal combinations that the human auditory system processes with particular efficiency. Research suggests that sounds with harmonic relationships, where frequencies relate as simple whole number multiples, require less processing effort and typically produce greater subjective pleasure than inharmonic alternatives. These harmonic qualities characterize many traditional sound healing instruments like singing bowls, chimes, and stringed instruments. Slow, rhythmic oscillations featuring gradual intensity variations, often called sound waves in contemplative practices, appear particularly effective for depth state facilitation. Research on sound meditation practices suggests that these slowly evolving patterns support what neuroscientists describe as transient hypofrontality, temporary reduction in prefrontal cortex activity associated with decreased analytical thinking and enhanced present moment awareness. These effects explain the long-standing use of instruments like gongs and singing bowls in contemplative traditions across cultures. The psychological benefits of these structured sound patterns extend beyond subjective experiences to measurable cognitive and physiological outcomes. Research indicates that appropriately selected rhythmic sound can enhance sustained attention for detail-oriented tasks, support emotional regulation during stress, and facilitate both sleep onset and sleep quality through their influences on brainwave patterns and autonomic nervous system balance. These patterns demonstrate powerful effects partly through what could be called predictable novelty, containing sufficient variation to maintain interest while following recognizable structures that don't require constant reorientation. This balance creates what might be described as engaged restoration, maintaining gentle attention engagement that prevents mind wandering while allowing recovery of directed attention resources depleted by more demanding tasks. White noise and ambient soundscapes. While natural and structured musical sounds provide distinct psychological benefits, certain categories of continuous ambient sound, including white noise, pink noise, and environmental ambient recordings, can support specific psychological functions through their consistent, predictable acoustic properties. Continuous ambient sounds create acoustic consistency that can significantly reduce the attentional costs of unpredictable sound environments. These sounds work not because they're inherently relaxing or emotionally engaging, but because they provide predictable sensory input that requires minimal processing resources while effectively masking more distracting alternatives. Research identifies several beneficial ambient sound categories. White noise, containing equal energy across all audible frequencies, demonstrates significant benefits for sleep and concentration through broadband masking. Studies show that white noise can effectively cover intermittent disturbing sounds like traffic, voices, or mechanical noises that might otherwise trigger attentional shifting or sleep disruption. This masking works through auditory threshold elevation, making it harder for the brain to detect other sounds by essentially raising the detection threshold and reducing the signal-to-noise ratio of potential disturbances. Pink noise, featuring decreasing energy as frequency increases, similar to many natural sound environments, shows particular promise for sleep enhancement. Research suggests that pink noise exposure during sleep may increase slow wave activity, brain patterns associated with deep, restorative sleep stages. Some studies suggest that pink noise might enhance memory consolidation during sleep through its influences on these slow wave patterns, potentially explaining its growing use in sleep improvement applications. Ambient environmental recordings featuring steady, non-dramatic sound environments like gentle rain, distant ocean waves, or soft wind create consistent acoustic texture without the potential harshness that pure white or pink noise sometimes exhibits. Studies suggest these natural ambient sounds may provide similar masking benefits while creating more positive subjective experiences, making them particularly valuable for extended use in environments where aesthetic experience matters alongside functional benefits. The psychological benefits of these ambient soundscapes appear particularly valuable in three specific contexts. Sleep environments benefit from appropriate ambient sound through both masking effects and entrainment assistance, subtle support for the brain's transition between wakefulness and sleep states. Research indicates that consistent ambient sound can reduce sleep onset latency, time required to fall asleep, and decrease nocturnal awakenings, particularly in environments with unpredictable noise intrusions. Open-plan workspaces demonstrate significant acoustic challenges through intelligible speech distraction, the particularly disruptive quality of understandable speech in the background during cognitive tasks. Studies show that appropriate ambient sound can reduce this distraction through partial speech masking, potentially improving concentration and reducing the cognitive costs of noise-related task switching in shared work environments. Anxiety management represents another valuable application, with research suggesting that consistent ambient sound can reduce physiological stress markers during anxiety-producing situations. This effect appears to operate through what could be described as sensory grounding, providing non-threatening sensory input that helps interrupt rumination cycles while creating a sense of environmental stability during psychological distress. While less emotionally engaging than natural or musical sounds, these ambient soundscapes provide valuable tools for specific psychological needs where consistency and predictability matter more than aesthetic or emotional qualities. Their effectiveness highlights how different sound categories serve distinct well-being functions, rather than any single sound type being universally superior for all psychological purposes. Creating acoustic comfort. Beyond understanding which sound categories benefit psychological well-being, creating genuinely supportive sonic environments requires thoughtful attention to implementation approaches that address both technical and psychological aspects of acoustic experience. Understanding sound perception beyond decibels. Creating psychologically supportive sound environments begins with recognizing that sound perception extends far beyond simple volume measurement to include multiple dimensions that collectively determine acoustic comfort or distress. The psychological impact of sound cannot be captured through decibel measurements alone. Human sound perception involves complex evaluations of multiple concurrent factors that together determine whether a sound environment supports or undermines psychological well-being. Research identifies several key perceptual dimensions that significantly influence acoustic comfort. Information content, what meaning a sound carries, often proves more significant than absolute volume in determining psychological impact. Studies show that intelligible background speech typically creates more cognitive disruption than non-speech sounds at equivalent or even higher volumes due to automatic semantic processing, the brain's tendency to automatically extract meaning from recognizable speech regardless of conscious attention direction. This processing consumes cognitive resources even when the speech content holds no relevance or interest. Controllability, the degree to which you can predict, modify, or escape sound, significantly influences its psychological impact. Research consistently demonstrates that identical sounds produce less stress and annoyance when listeners perceive control over them compared to when they feel helpless to influence the acoustic environment. This effect reflects perceived environmental mastery, the sense that you can effectively manage your surroundings rather than being passively subjected to them. Contextual appropriateness, whether a sound feels suitable for its environment, shapes its psychological effects beyond absolute acoustic properties. Studies show that sounds perceived as inappropriate for their context, like music in a space designated for concentration, typically create greater annoyance than objectively louder sounds that align with contextual expectations. This finding highlights how psychological factors can amplify or moderate responses to identical acoustic stimuli depending on situational factors. Temporal patterns, how sounds change over time, create significant psychological effects independently from average volume measurements. Research demonstrates that sounds with unpredictable temporal patterns or sudden onset characteristics typically produce stronger stress responses than predictable alternatives, even at lower average volume levels. This response pattern reflects novelty detection mechanisms, brain systems that automatically direct attention toward changing stimuli regardless of conscious intention. Understanding these multidimensional aspects of sound perception allows more sophisticated approaches to acoustic comfort that address psychological needs rather than merely meeting technical specifications. This understanding explains why environments with identical decibel measurements often produce dramatically different psychological effects, depending on how these additional perceptual dimensions align with human needs and expectations. Space-specific acoustic strategies. Different environments serve distinct psychological functions, requiring thoughtfully tailored acoustic approaches that support their specific purposes rather than applying universal sound standards regardless of context. Acoustic design should fundamentally align with how spaces serve human psychological needs. Environments supporting different activities benefit from distinct acoustic qualities that facilitate their particular psychological functions, rather than assuming identical sound conditions work equally well everywhere. Research supports several context-specific acoustic approaches. Restorative environments benefit from what could be called positive sound dominance, ensuring that psychologically beneficial sounds predominate while minimizing unwanted noise intrusions. Studies show that bedrooms, meditation spaces, and recovery areas function best with acoustic strategies emphasizing sound blocking from external sources combined with optional positive sound addition through natural soundscapes or masking systems that occupants can control. This approach recognizes that restorative activities often require both protection from unwanted sound and potential enhancement through beneficial alternatives. Productive environments require task-aligned sound profiles that specifically support their cognitive and communication functions. Research indicates that spaces for focused individual work benefit from steady background sound that masks distracting variations while maintaining overall quiet, collaborative areas function best with sufficient sound absorption to allow conversation without excessive reverberation. and creative spaces often benefit from moderate ambient sound that some studies suggest may enhance imaginative thinking compared to complete silence. Social environments demonstrate different optimal acoustic characteristics depending on their specific social functions. Research shows that spaces intended for intimate conversation benefit from acoustic intimacy, sound containment that allows comfortable speech at lower volumes while providing confidence in privacy. Conversely, communal gathering spaces function better with acoustic liveliness, moderate reverberation that creates a sense of shared energy and connection without hindering comfortable communication. These context-specific approaches recognize that sound functions not merely as an environmental factor to be minimized, but as an active ingredient in psychological experience that can either support or undermine a space's intended functions. By aligning acoustic strategies with specific psychological purposes, environments can actively contribute to, rather than merely avoid, interfering with the activities and states they're designed to facilitate. Acoustic modification techniques. Creating psychologically supportive sound environments often requires modifying existing acoustic conditions through approaches that address different aspects of sound behavior within spaces. Acoustic modifications typically involve multiple complementary strategies addressing different sound pathways. Effective sound management requires integrated approaches that address sound generation, transmission, reflection, and perception, rather than focusing on single pathway interventions that may solve one problem while leaving others unaddressed. Research supports several effective modification approaches. Absorption strategies involve adding materials that convert sound energy into heat through friction, effectively removing it from the environment. Research indicates that porous materials with varying density characteristics, like acoustic panels, fabric-wrapped fiberglass, and specialized acoustic plaster, can reduce reverberant sound energy by 30–80% depending on their specific application and coverage area. These approaches prove particularly valuable for reducing reflected sound buildup that creates the characteristic echoey quality of undertreated spaces. Barrier implementations block direct sound transmission between areas through mass, density, and sometimes specialized construction techniques. Studies demonstrate that effective barriers can reduce sound transmission by 20 to 30 decibels depending on their construction, with performance depending significantly on weakest link principles, the tendency for sound to find the easiest transmission path regardless of average barrier quality. This principle explains why seemingly minor gaps or flanking paths often undermine otherwise well-constructed sound barriers. Mechanical isolation addresses structure-borne sound transmission, vibrations traveling through solid materials rather than through air. Research shows that strategies like floating floors, resilient channel systems, and vibration isolation mounts can reduce structure-borne sound transmission by creating discontinuities that interrupt vibration pathways. These approaches prove particularly valuable for controlling low-frequency sounds that traditional absorption methods often fail to address effectively. While these technical approaches provide essential tools, research increasingly recognizes the importance of perceptual modification strategies that influence how existing sounds are experienced rather than changing the physical sound itself. Cognitive reframing involves changing the meaning associated with sounds through education and context modification. Studies show that identical sound environments create significantly different psychological impacts depending on whether they're perceived as temporary or permanent, necessary or unnecessary, and controlled by benevolent or indifferent others. These findings highlight opportunities for reducing sound impact through perception management alongside physical modifications. Masking approaches add specifically designed sounds to cover or perceptually reduce awareness of problematic alternatives. Research demonstrates that appropriate masking can effectively reduce the psychological impact of irritating sounds without eliminating them physically, with natural water sounds showing particular effectiveness for masking mechanical noise and conversation through informational similarity with psychological preference, covering similar frequency ranges while providing more acceptable content. Temporal scheduling strategies align noise-producing activities with times of day when their psychological impact proves minimal. Studies show that identical sound events create significantly different annoyance levels depending on timing, with sounds during expected active periods causing less distress than those during anticipated quiet periods. This finding highlights the importance of temporal management alongside absolute noise reduction in comprehensive acoustic comfort strategies. These varied approaches highlight the multidimensional nature of effective acoustic modification, addressing not just physical sound properties, but the complex perceptual, contextual, and psychological factors that collectively determine how sound environments influence well-being. By combining appropriate techniques based on specific needs and contexts, even challenging acoustic situations can be significantly improved through thoughtful intervention. Sound masking and privacy strategies. As social density increases in both residential and commercial contexts, sound privacy represents an increasingly significant psychological need that requires thoughtful management through both technical and behavioral approaches. Understanding speech privacy fundamentals. Effective privacy strategies begin with understanding the speech privacy system, the interrelated factors determining whether conversations remain appropriately contained or become unwanted intrusions across different spaces. Speech privacy involves a relationship between multiple factors, rather than simply absolute sound blocking. Understanding these relationships allows more effective and often more efficient privacy solutions than approaches focusing exclusively on barrier construction, regardless of other system components. Research identifies several key factors that collectively determine speech privacy effectiveness. The Speech Privacy Index represents a standardized measurement quantifying privacy level through assessment of speech intelligibility between spaces. This metric expresses privacy effectiveness as the percentage of speech that remains unintelligible to potential listeners, with values above 95% representing confidential privacy, where even concentrated listening efforts capture minimal meaningful content, while values below 80% indicate significant privacy compromise, where casual listening permits considerable comprehension. Background sound levels significantly influence privacy independently from physical sound barriers through the signal-to-noise relationship. Research demonstrates that appropriate background sound can improve speech privacy measurements without any physical construction changes by effectively raising the threshold at which speech becomes intelligible. This relationship explains why extremely quiet environments often create poor speech privacy despite seeming ideal from a noise reduction perspective. Room acoustics within both speaking and listening spaces dramatically influence privacy outcomes through their effects on sound propagation and clarity. Studies show that reverberant source rooms, where speaking occurs, typically reduce privacy by amplifying speech and projecting it further than acoustically absorbent alternatives. Conversely, reverberant receiving rooms, where listening occurs, typically enhance privacy by making speech less intelligible through reflected sound interference that muddles the clarity of speech that penetrates between spaces. Understanding these interrelationships allows what privacy engineers call the ABC approach to speech privacy, addressing absorption, blocking, and cover sound as complementary rather than competing strategies. Research demonstrates that integrated approaches, combining appropriate elements of all three strategies, typically create significantly better privacy outcomes than isolated interventions focusing exclusively on any single dimension regardless of implementation quality. Privacy zone creation. Beyond technical measurements, effective privacy management requires creating privacy zones, spaces specifically designed to support different types of communication needs through their acoustic characteristics. Privacy zones represent acoustic territories serving different communication functions. Effective environments provide multiple zone types supporting various privacy needs rather than attempting to make all spaces serve all purposes equally well. Research supports several distinct zone categories serving different privacy functions. Confidential zones support highly sensitive communication requiring absolute privacy assurance. Studies indicate these spaces function best with complete speech security. Isolation approaches combining substantial physical sound blocking, appropriate room acoustics to contain sound within the space, and sufficient background sound to mask any speech energy that might otherwise transmit beyond boundaries. These comprehensive approaches typically achieve privacy index ratings above 95%. Providing confidence that even concentrated listening efforts cannot extract meaningful content from conversations. Collaborative zones balance speech privacy with communication functionality for group activities. Research shows these spaces benefit from selective privacy gradient, approaches maintaining speech clarity within defined collaboration areas while preventing intelligible speech transmission beyond their boundaries. These balanced approaches typically achieve privacy index ratings of 80 to 90% at boundaries, providing confidence that casual listening outside the zone captures minimal intelligible content while allowing comfortable communication within the defined collaboration area. Transition zones manage sound between areas with different privacy requirements. Studies demonstrate the effectiveness of acoustic threshold creation, implementing specific features like vestibules, sound locks, or graduated absorption zones that create perceptible transitions between acoustic territories. These approaches typically reduce sound transmission compared to direct connections, providing valuable privacy enhancement through relatively modest interventions at key boundary points. The psychological importance of these zones extends beyond practical speech containment to include communication confidence, the subjective assurance that conversations occur in appropriate acoustic contexts. Studies show that perceived privacy significantly influences communication quality independently from actual acoustic measurements, with environments that feel insecure creating communication inhibition even when objective privacy measures indicate adequate protection. This psychological dimension highlights the importance of privacy legibility, providing clear environmental cues about expected privacy levels in different areas. Research demonstrates that spaces with explicit privacy signaling through visual design, location, and material choices create greater communication confidence than spaces with ambiguous privacy characteristics, explaining why even acoustically superior spaces sometimes fail to support comfortable communication when their privacy level remains unclear to occupants. Personal privacy management. While environmental design provides essential privacy foundations, individual behaviors and technologies offer additional strategies for managing acoustic privacy in various contexts. Personal privacy approaches provide tactical privacy management, adjustable strategies that complement environmental systems through individual action. These approaches offer flexibility, responding to changing needs and contexts beyond what fixed environmental systems can provide alone. Research supports several effective personal privacy approaches. Voice modulation represents perhaps the most fundamental personal privacy strategy through conscious management of speech characteristics. Studies demonstrate that speaking below normal conversational volume, creating what speech pathologists call confidential voice, typically reduces intelligible speech radius compared to standard speaking volume, providing significant privacy enhancement through behavioral adjustment alone. This approach proves particularly effective when combined with slightly slower speech rate and more precise articulation that maintain clarity for intended listeners, despite reduced volume. Positioning strategies utilize directional speech properties to enhance privacy through careful orientation relative to others. Research shows that positioning approximately 45 degrees off-axis from potential listeners typically reduces speech intelligibility compared to direct face-to-face orientation due to the directional properties of human speech. This directional effect explains why relatively minor position adjustments sometimes create significant privacy improvements without requiring physical barriers or technology. Masking tools provide personal control over local acoustic environments through portable sound field management. Research demonstrates that personal sound masking devices creating specifically engineered sound within approximately 3 to 6 feet of conversations can improve local privacy measurements while remaining minimally disruptive to intended communication participants. These portable approaches provide valuable privacy enhancement in environments where fixed systems prove impractical or insufficient for specific needs. Visual reinforcement utilizes privacy expectation signaling to establish clear boundaries through non-acoustic means. Studies show that visible boundary definition through positioning, screens, or even simple table signs indicating confidential conversations significantly reduces uninvited approach and listening behaviors independent from actual acoustic conditions. These visual signals appear to activate privacy respect norms that influence behavior beyond conscious consideration of whether eavesdropping seems physically possible. These personal strategies highlight the multidimensional nature of effective privacy management, addressing behavioral, positional, technical, and social dimensions, rather than focusing exclusively on acoustic engineering regardless of human factors. By combining appropriate personal approaches with well-designed environmental systems, substantially better privacy outcomes become possible even in challenging contexts where perfect acoustic isolation remains impractical. Conclusion. The sonic journey. Sound represents one of our most powerful yet frequently overlooked environmental influences, continuously shaping psychological experience through pathways that operate largely outside conscious awareness, while profoundly affecting well-being, cognitive function, emotional regulation, and social connection. By developing greater consciousness about your sonic environment, you transform passive noise exposure into active acoustic nourishment, supporting your specific psychological needs. As you continue exploring your personal relationship with sound, remember that perfect acoustic environments remain elusive given varied needs, practical constraints, and inevitable compromises required in most settings. The realistic goal involves creating the best available conditions within existing constraints, while gradually expanding possibilities through education, strategic modifications, and increased awareness of how sound shapes your daily experience. The journey toward more psychologically supportive sound environments represents not just personal improvement opportunity, but potential collective shift in how we understand and manage one of our most fundamental environmental influences. By recognizing sound as essential psychological nutrient rather than merely background noise, we open possibilities for environments that genuinely support human flourishing through more conscious alignment with our perceptual and psychological needs. Sound literally shapes your reality through vibrations that speak to both conscious and unconscious aspects of your being. When you respond to this conversation with greater awareness and intention, you transform passive sound exposure into active psychological nourishment, supporting greater well-being across all dimensions of experience. From your cognitive clarity to your emotional regulation, from your energy patterns to your sense of connection with others and the world around you. The soundscape of your life awaits more conscious composition through the remarkable psychological language of sound.